Okay, yes, what is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Rugby Muscle Podcast or YouTube channel, however you're watching or listening. It's great to have you here. Today's video is going to wrap up my sort of strength, hypertrophy tangent that I've been going down over the last few videos, and we're going to discuss why you should not be training like a bodybuilder or a powerlifter if you want your best rugby performance or just athleticism in general. So as a rugby player, you're already going to be aware that you need to be big and strong. It's very bloody important to perform at your best that you are big and strong enough. And so much so that it's at the base of the pyramid, right? It's one of the very few things that are going to carry over to everything that you do in rugby and is going to have a profound impact on your performance. So like I said, today we're going to discuss why your training should not look like that of a bodybuilder or a powerlifter. Yes, these guys are very fucking strong. These guys are, at the top of their sport, and we can take inspiration from them. But what they do is not going to be conducive as to what you want to reproduce as a rugby player or as an athlete in general, in my opinion. So I'll go into explaining like how they train and why I believe it's going to be different, and you're going to pick up a few things along the way for sure. Now, first and foremost, give this video a thumbs up if you want to give it an early little bit of support. Of course, comments in the comment section below are always appreciated. If you want to work with Rugby Muscle and stop doing all this thinking and programming yourself, links will be in the description below. All the support, all your likes are going to help. I'm just going to look over these videos and go, oh, cool. That video got some likes. Yes, and it's going to make me feel good. So if you want me to feel good about this stuff, give it a thumbs up, or just wait until you watch the whole video and then give it a thumbs up because you're like, yeah, that was actually a bloody good video. So the biggest argument that we have of training like powerlifters or bodybuilders is that these guys are big and strong. They are huge. They are really, really strong. They are at the top end of that sport, right? The strongest guys in the world, the people that can lift the most, are going to be your classic powerlifters. The biggest guys in the world at the leanest body weight, and obviously in the off season, not necessarily at the leanest body weight, but the biggest musculature guys are going to be your bodybuilders. Their sole goal is to train to get big and muscular. The sole goal of powerlifters are to get stronger. So we should take a lot from this. But I think when you look at the overall performance you need as a rugby player, you cannot afford to be the biggest or the strongest in totality or to train that way, because the idea here is that you've got to be good across the spectrum. And the more you head in the direction of one, you're going to take away from the other. You're going to overwhelm yourself, and you're just going to stop yourself from getting those real world adaptations. It's kind of like if you were trying to learn a different language. How would you go about it? Would you go about it with the goal of being able to be so proficient at Spanish that you were going to write a novel? You were going to be able to read all of the literature in the Spanish libraries and take it all in and get a complete understanding? Or do you want it to be just good enough that you can have conversation and you can really get in there in Mexico, in Spain, in South America, wherever you're going, in order to get by? What sort of language proficiency would you need? And I'll come back to that at the end. So when we're looking at the way powerlifters and bodybuilders, there are lots of different ways that we can sort of analyze this and compare it to what we want for rugby performance. First off is exercise selection, right? Powerlifters are going to mostly train the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. They're then going to use exercises that improve the squat, the bench, the deadlift. So they might do different variations of deadlifts in order to bring up their chief deadlift. They might switch out their main variation of deadlift that they're going to use in a competition for another one, just to avoid staleness, just to avoid overuse injuries. But overall, their exercise selection is all made through the lens of trying to improve their squat, their bench, their deadlift. That is their sport, that is their score. So yes, they want to get stronger, and they're going to use different rep ranges, they're going to use different things and different exercises, but overall, it's going to be whatever can improve their squat, bench, deadlift the most. More often than not, that's going to be doing lots of squatting, benching, and deadlifting, because you've got to improve at those skills. Bodybuilders, however, have a lot more freedom. In fact, they kind of have complete freedom. They can choose whichever exercises fit them best. They're not judged on any exercise. They're judged on how big their muscles grow, right? So they can use compound lifts because that is an efficient way of of growing lots of muscle. It's a way of getting lots of weight and therefore lots of tension through the muscle, which we know is a good vector of growth. We also know that isolation lifts can get a good pump going, can get extra volume going, can really isolate a muscle so that you can get more volume through that muscle without causing too much fatigue. So there's a balance there that each bodybuilder strikes, and over time they'll figure that out, and they're going to use whichever exercises can grow the muscle the most. Rugby players, however, will be training movements. They won't look at exercises, right? Whereas a bodybuilder will train chest, and they'll look at different variations that they can apply to grow their chest, to be able to pop the old pecs. Rugby players are instead going to look at horizontal pushing because they want to be strong in this motion of pushing to either fend, to make tackles, whichever, to just perform at their best. You're going to be training movement. So you're going to be training squatting, pushing, pulling, single arm. You're going to be training different locomotions. So you're going to be training running in different directions, etc. You're also going to be training speed. So you're going to use powerful movements and you're going to be more explosive. You're also going to look at isometric variations, particularly those that are scrummaging and are rucking. Isometric strength can really help you because you're going to be doing a lot of isometric when you're in a scrum or when you're in a ruck. You've also got to train different directions, right? Powerlifting particularly, and I guess bodybuilding, because you're just fighting gravity, is very much just up and down. Rugby players have got to use exercises that move them through different motions as well. I'll come on to execution and different goals in a bit, but understand that you've got to find the different movements that suit the goals that you're trying to train, or the outcome that you're trying to train. You're working backwards the whole time. Same thing for bodybuilding, you're working backwards as far as building your biggest muscles. You're training, same thing for powerlifting, you're working your way backwards from building your biggest and strongest squat, bench and deadlift. With rugby, you're looking at different speeds, different directions, different movements that you want to train, and then you're going to find the exercises that suit that the best, right? So say if you want to train a heavy hinge movement, the deadlift would be fantastic. But if you wanted to train like horizontal, all of a sudden deadlift doesn't really quite work because you're lifting it up off the ground. Instead, you might be looking at a broad jump, right? That would be a fantastic exercise, or maybe even a hip thrust. Different movements will lend themselves to different outcomes. And you cannot be biased with the movements that you want. You have to be really open, kind of like the bodybuilder. And in fact, kind of like the bodybuilder, if you do need to grow some muscle in some area to improve your performance, to give you long-term potential because of a bigger muscle, then yeah, you can add in some isolations to build up areas. Really good way to help prehab some injuries. If you can get big muscles there, and you get them firing right, you get a nice balance of muscle front to back, side to side, so that for example, your shoulders aren't hunched forward and you're exposing that joint. That's always going to be good, right? The other thing with exercise selection is that other areas of training have to be considered. So if you've got sprints or you've got a heavy, hard rugby session the next day, maybe doing heavy deadlifts is not going to be the solution because it's just going to knock you out so much. And maybe you have to look at something else, maybe machines, maybe you look at different isolation movements, maybe you look at something heavier but less lower back strenuous, that is going to then help you, get the outcome that you want, but without sacrificing that next day. That's something that bodybuilders and powerlifters don't really need to consider. Yes, they need to consider their training week, but they haven't got any. Their whole training week is going to be in the gym. Then when we look at exercise execution, so exercise selection, the movements that you're doing, the exercise execution is how you're doing those movements. Powerlifters are going to try and make things as easy as they can to squat, bench and deadlift the most amount of weight, right? They will adjust their technique so that they can actually add weight to the bar and therefore getting kind of stronger, but not really. They have their muscles, their body hasn't actually got stronger. They've just adjusted their technique so that they can lift more weight and then therefore get a bigger score. Oftentimes they'll make things with their exercises purposefully difficult. That could be through exercise selection, but it also could be through execution, right? They can adjust the tempo. They can go really slow on the way down. They can add pauses in. They can just set their movements up in different ways so that they expose their weaknesses and therefore they build up their weaknesses in order to then make that weakness no longer a weakness, and then it's not holding them back with their squat, their bench, their deadlift. But overall, powerlifters are really trying to figure out whatever technique they can and execute their movements however they can in order to lift the most weight on the bar. That doesn't necessarily always mean that they're actually building their muscle up to be the strongest or their body up to be the strongest. It just means that they're lifting the most amount of weight because of their technique. That's why you'll see a lot of powerlifters do low bar squats, because they're able to lift the most amount of weight that way, or sumo deadlift because they're lifting the most amount of weight that way. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not strong on the other variations, your high bar squats or your conventional deadlift. That just means that they can lift more sheer weight with those other movements, and therefore that's the ones that they're going to aim for. At the end of the day, powerlifters are, again, scored on what they can squat, bench, and deadlift. Bodybuilders are going to go kind of the opposite, right? They're going to work and they're going to feel the muscle. They're going to really try to isolate and squeeze that muscle and use that muscle so that it grows. They potentially are going to actually inhibit how much weight they can lift. Number one, because it might help avoid injuries, but number two, because they want to really squeeze that muscle. They're not concerned, they're not judged on how much weight they're lifting at all. They're not judged on any lift at all whatsoever. They're judged on how much muscle they build. So sometimes it's very conducive for a bodybuilder to use less weight and a less proficient technique, because that then helps them grow that muscle, right? It isolates that muscle. That muscle has to work harder because of the poorer technique or because of the less efficient technique, which means that yes, they're lifting less weight, but they're working the muscle better. With that in mind, they're not really going to lift ever explosively, because that just doesn't make sense, right? An explosive lift isn't really going to build the muscle that a bodybuilder would like. That's why most of their stuff nearly all the time is under very much control. Their form is kind of strict, right? As far as really isolating and working the muscles that they're trying to aim to build. Rugby players are actually going to have a huge variation in execution style. There are going to be slow movements to emphasize the movement skill. You're going to have faster movement to emphasize like power, or to train that movement skill more effectively, or to train that skill in a more rugby-like situation so they can really become efficient at that movement. So, you know, if you're looking at slow movement for agility, you can look at sway reaches where they're down and you're reaching each side and you're taking it really slowly. And then you can look at speed skater jumps where it's a much faster movement. Overall, they're going to try and move the weight as efficiently as possible because they want to be efficient and strong and powerful in those movements. They're not necessarily looking to isolate a muscle. They're not necessarily looking to put as much weight on the bar. They're just looking to build those movements to be as strong, as explosive, and as powerful as possible. Yes, they will build strength. Yes, they will build muscle whilst they're doing this. But overall, they want to become as efficient and strong in those movements as possible. This means that they're not going to lift sloppily. Like, you know, none of these guys, actually, the bodybuilders, the powerlifters, all the rugby players should not be lifting sloppily. But rugby players can get away with using a little bit more body English if it helps them with their overall movement, right? So for example, on the bench, a lot of times you'll see powerlifters and bodybuilders, particularly bodybuilders, will have no hip movement throughout their bench press. For a rugby player, using your hips and really driving that forward can actually help you with your performance on the pitch. And therefore, like, I don't think it should be as demonized for that particular goal. If you're trying to build an explosive movement, there is going to be some power from throwing of the weight. That is what you want as a rugby player for the most part, when you're particularly working power. Now, obviously, if you're looking at just building muscle for that prehab purpose, again, we'll go back to kind of what the bodybuilder does, but we're also still looking at it through the lens of movement. Then when we're looking at rep ranges, powerlifters, for the most part, will need their weight to be above 70% because that's where you're going to start to really increase that strength that is helping you towards your 1 rep max. They'll spend most of their time, though, not doing 1 rep maxes. That's not powerlifting if you're just testing your 1 rep max over and over and over again. That is just bullshit. What you have to do in order to build strength is to train in the 3 to 5 rep range, maybe 2 to 5 rep range, and you need to get enough volume in there to really increase that strength. The stronger you get, the more volume kind of you're going to need, and therefore, you know, the more of those heavier reps you're going to need to do. Of course, as a powerlifter, you're being judged on your 1 rep max, your single, how heavy you can lift for 1 rep. So you're going to have to practice that. That's a different skill than building up your 3 rep max. You could take 2 people who have the exact same amount of strength, but one of them could easily squat 1 rep max, or their 1 rep max, 20 kilos or something heavier than the other guy because they've practiced that skill. As you squat more and heavier and heavier and heavier, that weight makes the lift slightly different. The bar moves slightly differently. You can't make the same mistakes as you can do if you're, you know, using a load that is 20 kilos lighter. You have to practice your 1 rep maxes. You don't. but powerlifters do because that's what they're being judged on. Bodybuilders, now, like if there are bodybuilders watching this channel, I would like you to comment below and see if you disagree with me, but it doesn't really fucking matter. There are bodybuilders, there are people that are jacked and have built great muscle using all sorts of rep ranges. Like there is a huge discussion on this because I just think that all of the stuff works, so then everyone swears by their own technique or their own system that they use for growing muscle. I did a 4-part video series on how to grow muscle, and it still basically boils down to this. As for rep ranges, it doesn't really matter. It just has to be heavy enough that, like, you know, you're going to fail at least after about 30 reps. But like other than that, right, just get in enough volume. So more often than not, this means that people are going to work 8 to 15 rep range, because like lifting in that way is going to be the most time efficient way. You're not going to waste a load of time either warming up to get to really heavy sets of 5 or 3, or you're not going to waste all that time doing 20 reps. You start to fatigue where it doesn't really matter. Like, it's clear at this point that you need, like, as far as rep ranges, you just need the weight to be heavy enough, and then you need to go close enough to failure. That's kind of it, right? Like, people can overthink this and they'll overanalyze this, but that is the truth as far as rep ranges for bodybuilders goes. Rep ranges for rugby players is kind of similar in that it's kind of whatever, but it's more specific because you've got real specific goals, and therefore you need to adhere to the rep ranges and the weight that will allow you to hit those goals. For explosive work, for example, you can't really do more than 3 to 5 reps because that explosion will slow down. You'll slow down your movement, and therefore you won't be working explosive power or speed. You'll be working something else. You could be working movement efficiency with your jumps, or you can be working like extensive work. That would be fine, but that's not really working explosive power, right? Power comes from sets of 3 to 5 reps performed really explosively. Strength work is done 3 to 5 reps, as we've already discussed, explosively. If you do extra volume work, as far as like you're building some muscle, yeah, you're going to be working the 8 to 20 rep range. But in the same way as bodybuilders as well, you're still going to be building strength with that. You're still focusing on that weight. You're still trying to move it. But overall, like with the rep ranges, you also want to be looking at like your efficiency. Again, just with the other stuff, your other training has to be considered. So if you're doing, again, heavy rugby the next day, maybe doing really heavy squat work is not the best idea. Or maybe actually doing sets of 10 on squats is also a bloody terrible idea, because sets of 10 on squats can absolutely wreck you. So maybe if you're training a squat pattern, you just do enough sets of 3 in order to get some volume in, but you're not going to destroy your recovery for the next day of rugby, and you're actually going to be fine. Lots of things to consider as far as rep ranges go, but there's all the different goals and the rep ranges that will lead you towards those goals. As far as progression goes, this is something that I think is probably one of the most underrated but important points for this. Powerlifters, year on year, you're looking for 1 rep max increases, right? You're looking for, maybe you're not even looking for 1 rep max increases on all 3 squat, bench, deadlifts. The more advanced you get, maybe you're just looking at maintaining 1 and increasing 1. Maybe you're taking such a long-term outlook at this that you're staying away from your 1 rep maxes, that you're building everything else up so that eventually you're going to hit a bigger 1 rep max down the line. But the only real question you're asking is, am I increasing my capabilities of hitting a bigger total? That's it for powerlifting. That's your sole goal. Bodybuilders are going to be asking 2 questions, kind of. The main question that they're going to be asking is, am I growing muscle? Because that's going to be the hardest thing about being a bodybuilder. Yes, getting lean is really difficult. I understand that. But growing the muscle is going, that is bodybuilding. It's bodybuilding, right? Not body shredding. You're also going to ask, am I maintaining muscle at a leaner weight? So, it's you've got the cut and the bulk cycles, and more often than not, they're going to be losing a little bit of muscle as they're cutting that weight. But are they maintaining more of that overall muscle each time that they cut that weight? So the idea is that, yes, am I gaining muscle, and am I maintaining muscle at a leaner physique? Those are the 2 questions. But again, mostly it comes down to, am I growing muscle? Because year on year on year on year progression, that's what it's about. For rugby players, we've got so many more questions, right? We are asking, am I playing rugby better? And sometimes that's objectively difficult to answer, but I still think like that is rugby, how you as an individual play is subjective, and that still needs to be addressed, right? You could be playing in a worse team, but you could be playing better rugby, or you could be playing worse rugby in a better team. So I don't like the idea of, is my team successful? I look at looking at your own performance. You also can look through that as far as the strength and conditioning goes as, am I getting fitter? Am I getting stronger in contact? Am I getting faster? Am I getting more explosive? Am I beating more defenders? Am I getting injured less? And am I in a position to keep improving my skills? And that last one's kind of important as well, right? We don't want to be so focused, not just with our time, but with our recovery resources, with our whole athleticism, that we're so consumed by strength, just strength and muscle for this video is concerned. We don't want to get so consumed by growing muscle and strength so much so that we impede our other skills. We don't want we don't want that to inhibit our overall performance, both as far as like our time and availability to train those other areas, but also, you get those muscle bound people that they get so muscle bound that then they're liable to be injured on the pitch, or that they just become slower. You get people that are so much focused on strength that they put themselves at risk of injury for their lower back or for whatever. So asking that question, am I in a position to keep improving my skills, is really bloody important. And I think as the years go by, this is where it becomes like obvious to me that you should not be training this way. You should be training as a rugby player, right? Because powerlifters, they're just trying to build a heavier 1 rep max. Sometimes, yes, they're trying to build muscle, but other times, because they want to stay in a weight category, they're not trying to build muscle at all. Like, in fact, they might be avoiding trying to build muscle. And as the years go by, as you get, 3+ years into your pursuit of powerlifting, you start to have to really wring that sponge. You're going to be training longer sessions in order to really improve your lifts. You're going to be using advanced techniques and advanced methodologies, either with your programming or your exercise selection. And more often than not, actually what happens with powerlifters is that they take up another sport to set a new goal and focus and just get enough work in. And then after a few years, they'll come back to powerlifting. Bodybuilders, they're trying to grow, any muscle as the years go by. We're passing 3, 5, and we're getting into like the advanced years. Bodybuilders are just trying to grow muscle still. And again, that's why people tend to overthink it, because you're reaching the limit of growth that you can get. And so rather than saying, okay, this is my limit, let's put another focus on, they don't put that other focus becomes different things within bodybuilding, whether that's body part specialization. I still think that doesn't really work. In theory, it could work where you put all your resources towards just building your legs and everything else is on maintenance. I've tried this before. I don't think it works in the way that you think it would work. I just think it's just a nice distraction for you to focus on one muscle group. But does it really build that muscle group up and then the others are able to maintain? I think this is where, if your pursuit and your only pursuit is bodybuilding, it's very easy to overthink it, because this pursuit of just growing muscle is the same year on year on year, and it gets kind of boring. People will try to diversify either by doing like body part specialization, which I'm kind of skeptical on how much it works really. I don't think it works at all. I think it's just an idea that maybe it works if you're on steroids, but I don't think it works for the average person that's just trying to grow muscle. I think it's just overall a case of being patient and doing the same boring work over and over and over. But this work becomes so boring that more often than not, it's advised, or it just happens that these bodybuilders, just like the powerlifters, will either take up other sports or they look to set other goals. So a lot of bodybuilders will go to powerlifting because they don't want to look at their muscles not really growing, because they grow so slowly that they stay big enough and that's it. They don't really see the big changes. And so instead, they look at, okay, let's move more weight on the bar. And yes, overall, over time, that's going to help you build more muscle. But more importantly, in that short term, it's giving you a different focus for your mindset. So you're not looking at the lack of muscle, or bodybuilders are not looking at the lack of muscle growth. They're looking at, cool, these numbers on the bar are going up and up and up and up. And that's great, but it's also, it's kind of a distraction. Whether that's the best way to be a bodybuilder, I'm not overly sure. But whether, whatever you do really does matter that much, because, once you're past 5 years, or once you're close to your absolute potential, you're looking at maybe growing a pound of total muscle throughout the body a year with all of that dedication, or a lot less of that dedication. Does it really matter? Who knows? Rugby players have all these different other areas to address. So say, you're already fit enough, okay, then you can look at, am I getting stronger in contact, or am I getting faster, or am I getting more explosive? Am I beating more defenders? Am I getting injured less? And am I still in a position to keep improving my skills? Your skills should be constantly improving throughout. You'll look at actually this is kind of a side tangent, but if you would have watched some of the finals recently and you watched quite a lot of high level rugby, especially the finals. So you look at the Premiership final, you look at the Ultimate Rugby Championship final, you even look at the Super Rugby final, and what you're going to find is lots of really experienced players. There are people in their mid to late 30s throughout these teams still performing at the best because they're able to keep improving their skills and keep improving at all these different areas. And that's the really cool thing about being a rugby player, is that you've got all these different avenues to go down. Or if you're a bodybuilder, you're just looking at, am I growing muscle? When you're looking at a pound a year, or if you're a powerlifter and you're looking at, am I adding to my total, and you're doing all this work and you're having to do really long sessions, am I adding a few kilos? Like, it becomes really difficult, particularly for motivation wise. And so that's why I think instead, as rugby players, we should be looking at, from our strength and our muscle gaining perspective, we want to be looking at the 80-20. And I think this is the biggest difference to how rugby players should be training versus powerlifters and bodybuilders. Rugby players need just that 80% of strength. You need enough strength in order to increase your performance. You need enough muscle in order to increase your performance. But that's not your sole goal. So you just need that 80%, which means that you need to only put that 20% of the work in. And that allows you so much time and so much focus for all the other areas that you can improve as a rugby player, that potentially that 20% never really gets stale. And if it does get stale, it's a minimal amount of time of your week. Bodybuilders and powerlifters, that's 100% of their training. That's all of their training. They're all encompassed by this. And they're doing that for that extra 20%, for that little gain, because that's what they need, because that's what they're judged on. As a rugby player, you have these other areas that you're judged on. You're judged on how well you play rugby. So devoting 100% of your time to these efforts just doesn't make sense. And particularly when you can get most of the results from a minimal amount of work, then like you're free to do everything else. That's how you should be training. You should be using that 80-20 rule to get the most out of your performance. So to go back to the language analogy that I touched on at the beginning, if you were to try to learn Spanish in order to read the entire library here that's in front of us, or you're trying to write a book in Spanish, like the amount of work that you'd have to put in would be so much greater than the amount of work that you just need to put in order to have conversations with people. The other thing with having conversations with people is that, and this might be abusing this analogy a little bit, but you learn extra stuff. You learn your local slang that helps you get by. You learn the local lingo, you learn expressions, and that will allow you to communicate better. Kind of like if you just did enough strength work to then become a better rugby player, you learn different movements on the rugby pitch a little bit more efficiently than if you were just trying to do the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. Or maybe if you look at it from a muscle building perspective, you don't grow unnecessary muscle that might actually inhibit your game. Just like if you were learning, enough to write a book, maybe you're learning real old colloquial terms that aren't used these days and actually takes up some of your space that is completely unnecessary. Maybe that's pushing this analogy too far, but you get the idea, right? You need to stick to the 80-20 rule when it comes to building strength and muscle for rugby, because that is where you're going to see by far the most benefit as a player. And not only are you going to see that benefit on the pitch, you're also going to experience that as far as motivation is concerned. A lot of people on this channel that watch this channel, a lot of people that come through Rugby Muscle might struggle with long-term motivation. And there's no wonder, particularly if they're trying to train like a powerlifter or a bodybuilder, they're not seeing week-to-week changes in their physique or how much weight they can add to the bar. And it gets pretty disheartening. And then year on year on year, it becomes difficult, right? But as far as rugby goes, there are so many different areas, and this is why even if you're not a rugby player, this is a fantastic way to approach your training. There are so many different areas to address and improve, and that means that there's always one that can be improved fairly easily, and you don't have to overanalyze it, right? Again, as taking the questions from before, am I playing rugby better? Am I getting fitter? Am I getting stronger in contact? Am I getting faster? Am I getting more explosive? Am I beating more defenders? Am I getting injured less? Am I in a position to keep improving my skills? And so with that, you've got so many different areas. And if you start to stagnate on, say your goal at the minute is strength, and you start to stagnate on strength, rather than say, oh fuck, this is really boring, you just put back the strength to real maintenance mode, and that could be just a couple sets a week. And then you really focus on your fitness, or you focus on your speed, or you focus on power. And that way, or you could even just keep strength on like the back burner all year round and slowly build it up whilst focusing on all these other areas. That's how we program things at Rugby Muscle. And if you're interested in that stuff, there'll be links in the description, as I said below. Fairly comprehensive video today, but I really did think that this is an important thought that I needed to get out there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you haven't already, please hit thumbs up. If you're new to this channel, consider hitting subscribe for watching more videos like this, really helping out mostly amateur players get the best out of their rugby performance. And with that, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.